They say some lines should never be crossed, but sometimes the lines blur before you even realize you've stepped over them. My name is Alyssa, and I have a secret. One so forbidden, so dangerous, it could destroy my family if anyone ever found out. I had an affair with my uncle. It wasn't something I planned, not something I even thought was possible. But once it started, there was no turning back. The guilt, the desire, the secrecy, it became my entire world. And now, it's a story I can't keep buried any longer. It began when I moved back home after college. My parents had always been overprotective, and coming back felt like stepping into a cage I thought I'd outgrown. But my uncle Ethan was different. He wasn't like the rest of my family. He was younger, charming, and had a way of making me feel understood. He wasn't really my uncle by blood. He'd married into the family years ago, but to everyone else, he was as much a part of it as anyone. To me, though, he was something else entirely. At first, it was innocent. We talked during family gatherings, laughing at inside jokes and exchanging knowing glances when my mother's nagging got too much. I didn't think much of it, but then there was the night everything changed. It was late, and everyone else had gone to bed. Ethan and I were sitting on the porch, sharing a bottle of wine. The air was thick with summer heat, and the conversation had taken a deeper turn. He told me about his struggles, how his marriage to my aunt had been falling apart for years, how he felt like no one really saw him anymore. "I see you," I said without even thinking. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. It was like a switch flipped between us, and suddenly, the air was charged with something I couldn't name, something I didn't want to admit. We didn't touch that night. We didn't have to. The tension was enough to leave me lying awake for hours, replaying every word, every look. The next day, I avoided him, ashamed of the thoughts racing through my mind, but it didn't matter. At the next family barbecue, he found me in the kitchen alone. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low, careful. I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I'm fine." But I wasn't fine, and he knew it. He stepped closer, his hand brushing mine as he reached for a glass. The touch was so brief, so innocent, yet it sent a jolt through me like lightning. I pulled my hand away, but the damage was done. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his tone unreadable. "I haven't," I lied, but my voice betrayed me. His eyes searched mine, and I felt exposed, like he could see every thought I was trying to hide. "If I've done something wrong, you haven't," I interrupted, shaking my head. But he had. Without meaning to, he'd made me feel something I wasn't supposed to feel. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I texted him a simple message: "We need to talk." His response came quickly: "Come over." I shouldn't have gone. I knew it the second I walked through his door. But when he opened it, standing there in a t-shirt and jeans, his hair messy like he'd been running his hands through it, I couldn't turn back. "What's going on?" he asked, his brow furrowed in concern. I opened my mouth to explain, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stepped closer, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "Alyssa," he said, his voice trailing off as I reached up and touched his face. It wasn't a kiss, not at first. It was a moment suspended in time, the two of us standing there, caught between what we knew was right and what we couldn't stop. And then, like a dam breaking, his lips found mine. The kiss was everything, soft and urgent, hesitant and all-consuming. It was wrong, so deeply, terribly wrong, but it felt like the only thing that had ever been right. After that, there was no going back. We couldn't stay away from each other. Every stolen glance, every accidental touch only fueled the fire between us. We started meeting in secret, finding excuses to leave family gatherings early or slip away unnoticed. Each time we were together, it felt like we were playing with fire. But the danger only made it more intoxicating. I knew it couldn't last. Secrets like ours always have a way of coming to light. One afternoon, as we lay tangled together on the couch in his apartment, he brushed my hair back and whispered, "What happens if they find out?" "They won't," I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. But deep down, I knew it was a lie. The first crack came when my aunt, his wife, started to suspect something. She confronted me one day, her eyes sharp and accusing. "Have you been spending time with Ethan?" she asked, her tone casual but her gaze unrelenting. I stammered out a denial, but I could tell she didn't believe me. From that moment on, I felt her eyes on me at every family event, watching, waiting. The guilt began to eat away at me. I couldn't look my parents in the eye, couldn't sleep without the weight of what I was doing crushing me. But I couldn't stop either. I was trapped, torn between the life I was supposed to live and the one I couldn't walk away from. Then came the night everything unraveled. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a photo of Ethan and me, locked in an embrace, our faces inches apart. Underneath, the message read, "Tell the truth, or I will." Panic set in. I showed Ethan the message, my hands shaking as I held out the phone. Who could have sent this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His jaw tightened and he shook his head. I don't know, but we can't let them control us. Control us. The words felt hollow. We weren't in control, not of the situation, not of ourselves. The next family gathering was a disaster. The tension was palpable, every glance and whispered conversation sending my nerves spiraling. And then my aunt stood up, her voice cutting through the room. "I have something to say," she began, her eyes locking onto mine. The confrontation that followed was explosive. Accusations flew, voices were raised, and by the end of it, there was no denying the truth. My family was in shambles, my parents devastated, my aunt furious, and Ethan was silent, his face a mask of guilt and regret. In the days that followed, the fallout was unbearable. My parents refused to speak to me, my aunt filed for divorce, and Ethan and I were forced to cut all contact. I moved away, trying to start over, but the weight of what I'd done followed me everywhere. Do I regret it? Every day. But a part of me still aches for him, still wonders what might have been if things had been different. Some lines, once crossed, can never be undone, and some secrets, no matter how deeply buried, will always find their way to the surface. After the family confrontation, I felt like my world had collapsed. The days that followed were suffocating, filled with the echoes of my parents' disappointment, my aunt's rage, and my own guilt. I tried to reach out to Ethan, desperate for some kind of comfort, but he wouldn't answer my calls or respond to my messages. It was like he had disappeared, leaving me to face the fallout alone. The silence hurt more than anything else. For weeks I kept replaying our moments together, trying to convince myself that it had meant something to him, that I hadn't just destroyed my family for a fleeting affair. But the truth has a way of finding you even when you try to run from it. One evening, as I was sitting in the small apartment I'd rented to get away from everything, my phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. "We need to talk." My heart leaped and sank at the same time. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. We met at a park on the edge of the city, far from prying eyes. When I saw him, he looked different, older, warier, like the weight of everything we'd done was etched into his face. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking, "for everything." I wanted to be angry, to demand why he had cut me off when I needed him most. But all I could do was nod, tears streaming down my face. "What we did, it was wrong," he continued. "I can't change that. But I can't pretend I didn't love you either." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. Love. It was the first time he'd said it out loud, and it was both a balm and a curse. "But love isn't enough, is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head, his eyes filled with regret. "No, not in this case." We sat in silence for what felt like hours, the reality of our situation sinking in. We couldn't be together. Not now, not ever. The final goodbye was the hardest thing I've ever done. As I walked away from him for the last time, I felt like a part of me had been ripped away. But I also knew it was the only way to start healing. I went back to my apartment, determined to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy. My family refused to speak to me, and every attempt to reach out was met with cold rejection. I was completely alone. Months passed, and slowly the pieces of my life began to fall back into place. I found a job, made new friends, and started therapy to work through the pain and guilt. But some wounds never fully heal. There are nights when I lie awake, thinking about Ethan, wondering if he's okay, if he's moved on. And then there are the dreams, those vivid, aching dreams where we're together, where the world doesn't judge us, and we're free to love each other without consequence. But when I wake up, reality crashes down around me, and I'm reminded of the lines we crossed, the people we hurt, and the lives we shattered. One day, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Effin. In it, he wrote about how he'd moved to another state to start fresh, how he was trying to rebuild his life just like I was. He said he hoped I was finding happiness, even if it wasn't with him. And then, at the very end, he wrote, "No matter what, you'll always have a piece of my heart." I folded the letter and put it in a drawer, knowing I couldn't hold on to it forever. It was a reminder of everything I'd lost, and everything I'd gained by letting go. Because in the end, some love stories aren't meant to have happy endings. Some are meant to teach us lessons, to show us who we are and who we want to be. I'll always carry the scars of what happened, but I've learned to live with them, to accept that I made mistakes, that I hurt people I loved, and that I can't change the past, but I can choose the future. And for the first time in a long time, I'm hopeful. Do I still think about him? Yes. But I also know that loving someone doesn't always mean being with them. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let them go. That's my story. A story of forbidden love, of choices that can never be undone, and of the painful, beautiful journey to forgiveness, both from others and from myself.